Hello again, folks. Bobby here, Mulholland Drivethru channel. And today's episode, I'm going to talk for the first time in a new category of videos I'm going to do. I'm going to call this category Talking Head because it's just my head, and I'm going to talk about a different discussion for each one of this category. And this discussion today I'm going to start is one that you may or may not find particularly relevant. I'm going to talk about starting a record collection. I know some people who may be watching this have very much started their own and have been continuing that for many years. But some might just be starting now, or you might be thinking about starting a vinyl collection. And I'm going to tell you some tips which I wish someone had told me when I first started. Hopefully that would be, helpful for you if you're a beginner in your collection. So I guess I'm going to start by making the observation that you've probably read a lot of articles or you've seen a lot of these sorts of videos giving advice about how to do it properly. This is the way to collect records. This is what you do first, and then you do this. Those sorts of things. In terms of what to purchase and when to purchase certain things, there's all sorts of lists that you can read as well. I know, for example, major publications like Rolling Stone or NME, those sorts of things publish lists of the greatest 100 or 200 or 500 albums of all time, and sometimes it's tempting to sort of go, well, I'm going to buy those first because then I'll have the greatest albums of all time in my collection. There's even books you can get, there's a book that someone gave me quite a few years ago called 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. And for a while I thought, maybe I should try to collect all of those albums for my collection. There are many lists, and lists are great. I think those who have been paying attention to my humble opinion for even a little amount of time know that I love a good list. Lists are one of my favourite things in the world. But I think you need to personalise the list for you. There's no point in using someone else's list. I think if you personalise your purchases, particularly initially, I think your collection is going to mean much more to you, in a kind of authentic way. Purchasing someone else's suggestions or purchasing albums on a generic list from a famous publication might make you feel like you're doing the right thing, but I don't think it's going to mean as much to you. When I started collecting properly 15 or so years ago, I first of all aimed to collect all of my favourite albums up to that point in my life on vinyl. My initial ambition was just to purchase, my 50 or so favourite albums that I absolutely adored, and I needed to own them on vinyl first. And that felt really good. It felt much better than just going down someone else's list. And once I owned those albums, then I felt a bit more comfortable perhaps taking a few more risks and, buying things that, I might have only heard a few times but wanted to get into more, those sorts of things. So that's my number one suggestion. Just start by buying things that you already love. And that's going to help you really enjoy the habit of collecting from the outset. I think it's going to help you enjoy it a lot more than if you were just doing something a bit more impersonal. After that, I remember thinking that, okay, now that I've got my favourite albums, now I need to replace all of my CDs with vinyl copies of the same albums. And I think I started doing that for a little while. Like I sort of prioritised them and, sort of bought some ones that I also really enjoyed, and that lasted a little bit. But of course, curiosity also gets the better of you, and you see all these albums in shops which you don't own on CD, and you think, wow, I mean, I've heard all these things that I'm buying already. maybe let's take some risks, take some chances. And so I don't think replacing every CD is, as OCD as it sounds, and I am a little bit OCD, I don't think it's something I would particularly recommend. I mean, certainly get the ones you most enjoy on vinyl. That's really satisfying, but don't feel like you need to sort of tick all of those boxes before you take some risks. I'm also a bit of a completist. My favourite artists, I need to sort of complete my vinyl collection for all of those artists, people like Bowie or Tom Waits or Dylan, etc. Beatles, Stones. I feel like I need to own all of that stuff, and in most cases I almost do, except for a few expensive or rare albums. I do own most of that stuff, but I think that's also something I might not recommend for people who aren't as obsessive as I am, because you're also sort of, it's an opportunity cost. The money you're spending on, an 80s Bowie album, which you're probably not going to put on very much, apart from, the early 80s ones. Spend that money rather on something that you are going to put on, and you can worry about being a completist, OCD person later on. So try not to be a completist, I guess, is my little tip. After that, I think, you start to sort of get a feel for what sort of collector you are. And there's different types of collectors, I know, and I'm not going to tell you which collector you should be or which type of collector you should be. There's audiophiles who need to find the best sounding copy of everything. There's completists, as I was saying, people who need to get every album by particular artists. There's people who specialise in a genre or, a particular period of music. There's people who just need a broad mix of some of their favourite music. There's curious and risk-taking people who just want to be surprised and maybe sort of pick something just based on the cover alone that they've never heard. You get a feel pretty quickly for what sort of collector you want to be. And I guess my experience so far has been that you don't necessarily stick to that plan. Like, yes, I bought some sort of audiophile quality recordings, which I love to listen to, but I don't consider myself, exclusively an audiophile, and in some cases I don't really care what edition of an album I find. In fact, I've found a lot of newer pressings to sound sometimes better than some of the older ones. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule in in quality of records and the time period that they're produced. Sometimes there are rules about, for example, Japanese pressings generally sound superior to most other pressings from other places, but I think, in a sort of more general way, you will be a bit looser sometimes with what collector you are, what type of collector you are, and that's okay. And if you're not, if you just want to stick to one thing, that's also okay. There's different types of collectors in the community, and it doesn't really matter. I don't think there's one way to do it. Don't feel like you have to buy original pressings. Don't feel like you have to buy Japanese pressings. Don't feel like you need to buy the most expensive pressing of a particular album. But if you're that way inclined, go for it. If your bank balance can afford that, go for it. My other big tip is to listen to copies at the shop if you can, particularly if you're worried about a newer pressing, like if you're really unconvinced that newer pressings are decent, reissues of older albums. Have a listen at the shop and see what you think, and even if they have an older copy, try to compare the two. And I think often you might be surprised about how good newer pressings can sound. Of course, bank balance plays a part as well, and over the years I've learned a very important rule, I think. Sometimes we're limited by our budget every week, and my tip here is that if you have to choose between two albums or more than two albums, and you can't buy them all or both, then buy at least the one or ones which you think will sell pretty quickly. If it's a new edition of something or a new release and they're going to be gobbled up quickly, if you're into sort of coloured vinyl or that sort of thing, there's no guarantee that it's going to be there next week. Some Pressings of particular albums can be very limited, and I've certainly in the past missed out on a lot of what I thought would be much more widely available music, but actually it sold out pretty quickly. So sometimes you might want to listen to one album more than another album, so you want to buy the one that you feel like listening to, but buy the one that you think might actually sell out more quickly. That's a hard lesson to learn, I think. I wish someone had told me that a number of years back. Two more tips before I call it a day. The second last one is please, please, please protect your covers, your sleeves, with plastic covers. I spent the first few years not really learning this very quickly, and I haven't really destroyed many covers, but I've certainly lessened the quality of some of my covers by, leaning them against other records which have somehow marred the cover's appearance. The cardboard texture of some record covers weathers more quickly than others, and you will be amazed just how well plastic sleeves work. If you've never sort of gone through that motion, please cover your records. Not just for the sake of reselling them one day, it's not about that, it's just about looking after them. And the ring wear and stuff that can happen when they're not covered is really unfortunate. Most importantly, the die cut sleeves, anything that's an odd shape. For example, Curtis Mayfield's Superfly, if it's got the die cut cover, give it a plastic sleeve immediately. Otherwise, if you lean it against another one and you pull Curtis out and the other one puts pressure on the fold, it'll rip and you'll kick yourself. Rolling Stones, Some Girls, all those sorts of things. Make sure you put covers on them. And finally, invest in a good stylus and cartridge. I think it's something that, particularly people who are on a budget and you get a sort of cheaper player, it is worth the extra money, even if it's like, not a hugely expensive one, but just an upgrade. Like, make sure that you invest in something that's not going to eat your records up if you have a cheaper player. And, if you can afford a pretty good one, I'm talking like, a couple of hundred, few $100 plus, that's my recommendation, because it will bring out your music like you've never heard before. If you're used to hearing cheaper cartridges, invest. Just don't spend money on records for a few weeks and get a good cartridge, and you can listen to all your records again and they're going to sound spectacular as if you're hearing them for the first time. So it's really worth plastic sleeves and a good stylus and cartridge. They're my big tips for starting a collection. I know a lot of you have probably heard all of those before, but hopefully that helps at least a few people out there who are starting their collection. And most importantly, don't think that there's only one way to start a collection. There's all sorts of ways. You're not doing it wrong. You're never doing it wrong. Just do what's right for you. And try to ignore those sort of generic lists as much as possible, at least at first. Worry about the lists later. And that's it. I hope that helps. I hope you're all well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.